A memorable trip to London. Last summer, I had the incredible opportunity to visit London, a city that had always been on my bucket list. I had read so much about its history, culture, and vibrant atmosphere that I was eager to experience it all firsthand. As the plane touched down at Heathrow Airport, I felt a mixture of excitement and curiosity about what lay ahead. After collecting my luggage, I headed to my hotel, which was located near Paddington Station. The journey into the heart of the city was smooth, thanks to London's efficient transport system. I hopped on the Heathrow Express, and in just 15 minutes, I was surrounded by the iconic sights and sounds of London. Once I checked into the hotel, I couldn't wait to start exploring. I decided to begin my adventure with a visit to one of London's most famous landmarks, Big Ben. As I walked along the Thames River, the towering clock tower came into view, its grand design captivating me. Seeing Big Ben in person was a surreal experience, far more impressive than any photo could convey. The Houses of Parliament next to it were equally awe-inspiring, with their Gothic architecture and rich history. From there, I made my way to Westminster Abbey, another iconic site. The Abbey was a treasure trove of British history, filled with the tombs of kings, queens, and famous writers like Charles Dickens. Walking through the ancient halls, I felt a strong connection to the past, imagining the coronations and royal weddings that had taken place there. My next stop was Buckingham Palace, the official residence of the British monarch. Although I couldn't go inside, watching the changing of the guard ceremony was a highlight of my trip. The precision and discipline of the guards, dressed in their traditional red tunics and bearskin hats, were truly impressive. Feeling hungry after hours of sightseeing, I decided to try some traditional British food. I found a quaint pub nearby and ordered fish and chips, which came with a side of mushy peas. The crispy, golden battered fish and thick-cut chips were delicious. It was the perfect meal to recharge for the rest of the day. After lunch, I made my way to the Tower of London, one of the city's most historic sites. As I entered the fortress, I could almost hear the echoes of medieval knights and royalty. I was especially fascinated by the crown jewels, which were on display. The sparkling diamonds, rubies, and sapphires were a testament to Britain's long history of wealth and power. The next day, I decided to explore London's museums. My first stop was the British Museum, which houses some of the world's most famous artifacts, including the Rosetta Stone and Egyptian mummies. Each exhibit offered a glimpse into different civilizations, and I found myself completely engrossed in the ancient history surrounding me. In the afternoon, I visited the Natural History Museum, which was equally impressive. Its vast collection of fossils, including a towering dinosaur skeleton, transported me back millions of years. The museum was both educational and fun, with interactive exhibits that made learning about the natural world a fascinating experience. Of course, no trip to London would be complete without visiting its famous parks. I spent a peaceful afternoon in Hyde Park, where I rented a bike and cycled around the Serpentine Lake. The greenery, open space, and serene atmosphere were a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of the city. Before leaving London, I made sure to take a ride on the London Eye, the giant Ferris wheel on the South Bank. As I slowly ascended, I was treated to panoramic views of the city. From the top, I could see landmarks like St. Paul's Cathedral, the Shard, and Tower Bridge stretching out across the horizon. The experience was breathtaking and offered a perfect way to reflect on my trip. On my last evening, I wandered through Covent Garden, an area known for its lively street performers, boutique shops, and restaurants. I enjoyed a meal at a cozy Italian restaurant, then spent some time watching a group of musicians perform in the square. The atmosphere was festive, and I felt a sense of contentment as my London adventure came to an end. As I boarded the plane back home, I knew that London had left a lasting impression on me. The city's rich history, vibrant culture, and welcoming spirit made it a truly unforgettable trip. I promised myself that one day, I would return to explore even more of what this incredible city has to offer. An unforgettable adventure in London. Last spring, I finally fulfilled a long-standing dream, visiting London. It had always been a city I admired from afar, with its fascinating history, iconic landmarks, and diverse culture. So, when the opportunity arose, I packed my bags, booked my flight, and set off for an adventure that I knew would be unforgettable. The moment I landed at Heathrow Airport, I was struck by how vast and modern it was. After navigating through customs, I took the Tube, London's famous underground railway, straight to my hotel in Kensington, a charming and quiet part of the city. As I stepped out of the station, I was greeted by rows of beautiful old buildings, cobbled streets, and the sight of the iconic red double-decker buses passing by. My first day in London started with a visit to Trafalgar Square, a bustling square in the heart of the city. It was a sunny day, and the fountains sparkled in the light as tourists and locals gathered around. In the center stood Nelson's Column, guarded by 4 giant lion statues. The atmosphere was lively, and street performers entertained the crowds. I couldn't resist taking a few photos before heading to my next stop, the National Gallery. The National Gallery is home to some of the world's most famous artworks, and walking through its halls was like stepping into a history book. I saw paintings by masters like Van Gogh, Da Vinci, and Monet. Each painting told a story, and I found myself lost in the colors and details of the artworks. I spent hours exploring the galleries, but I knew I had so much more of London to discover. In the afternoon, I visited Covent Garden, an area famous for its markets and street performers. As I wandered through the cobblestone streets, I was tempted by the variety of unique shops and stalls selling everything from handmade crafts to high-end fashion. I treated myself to a delicious cup of coffee and watched a talented group of acrobats perform in the central square. The energy was contagious, and I could see why so many people loved spending time here. The next day, I was eager to see one of London's most famous sights, the Tower Bridge. As I walked along the River Thames, the towering structure came into view, its blue and white steel arches standing out against the skyline. I decided to take the tour that allowed me to walk across the upper walkway, offering incredible views of the river and city below. It was thrilling to see London from such a height, and I learned a lot about the history of the bridge and its construction. From there, I made my way to the nearby Borough Market, one of London's oldest and most renowned food markets. The aroma of freshly baked bread, sizzling street food, and exotic spices filled the air. I sampled some traditional British pastries and couldn't resist buying some local cheese to enjoy later. The market was a foodie's paradise, and I spent hours exploring its stalls. Later that evening, I had a ticket to see a play at the historic Globe Theatre, a recreation of the original theatre where Shakespeare's plays were performed. The experience was magical. The open-air setting, the actors in period costumes, and the powerful dialogue transported me back in time. Watching a Shakespearean play in such an authentic setting was a highlight of my trip. On my third day, I visited Camden Town, known for its alternative culture and vibrant market. Camden was unlike any other part of London I had seen. Its streets were filled with colorful murals, quirky shops, and food stalls offering cuisine from every corner of the world. I spent hours browsing through vintage clothing stores, buying unique souvenirs, and sampling food from different cultures. It was a feast for the senses, and I loved the eclectic, creative energy of the area. No trip to London would be complete without visiting the British Library, one of the largest libraries in the world. As a lover of books, this was a dream come true. I marveled at the historic manuscripts on display, including ancient texts, handwritten letters from famous authors, and even one of the original copies of the Magna Carta. The library was a place of knowledge and history, and I could have easily spent an entire day there. On my final evening in London, I decided to take a Thames River cruise. As the boat sailed gently down the river, the city lights began to twinkle in the dusk. We passed by the Shakespeare's Globe, the Shard, and the impressive Tower of London, all lit up against the evening sky. The cruise offered a peaceful and beautiful way to see the city from a new perspective. With a cool breeze on my face and the skyline glowing around me, I reflected on all the amazing experiences I had over the past few days. As I packed my bags and prepared to leave, I knew that this trip had been everything I had hoped for and more. London had shown me its history, its culture, and its heart, and I knew that I would carry these memories with me for a lifetime. It was a city that welcomed me with open arms, and I promised myself that one day, I would return to explore even more of its wonders. Exploring the wonders of London. Last winter, I embarked on a trip that I had been dreaming of for years, a visit to the vibrant city of London. The moment I set foot in the city, I could feel its energy. The air was crisp, and the streets were alive with both locals and tourists, all weaving their way through the endless attractions London had to offer. After settling into my hotel near Russell Square, I immediately decided to start my adventure. My first destination was the British Museum, one of the most famous museums in the world. Walking through the grand entrance, I was overwhelmed by the sheer size of the place. I wandered through halls filled with ancient Egyptian mummies, Greek sculptures, and treasures from around the world. The Rosetta Stone was particularly fascinating, as it unlocked the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphics. The museum was a feast for the mind, and I spent hours absorbing the rich history of human civilization. Later that day, I headed towards Oxford Street, London's busiest shopping district. As I walked along the bustling street, I was greeted by festive lights and window displays, since it was close to Christmas. Shoppers crowded the sidewalks, carrying bags from iconic British stores like Harrods and Selfridges. I popped into a few shops to pick up souvenirs and gifts before grabbing a quick coffee from one of the many cozy cafes that lined the street. The following day, I made my way to St. Paul's Cathedral, one of the most magnificent churches I had ever seen. Its towering dome dominated the skyline, and the interior was just as awe-inspiring. I climbed to the top of the dome, and though it was a bit of a workout, the panoramic views of London from the top made it all worthwhile. I could see famous landmarks like the Shard and Tower Bridge in the distance. In the afternoon, I crossed the iconic Millennium Bridge to visit the Tate Modern, London's leading modern art museum. The building itself was a work of art, converted from an old power station. Inside, I explored galleries filled with works from artists like Picasso, Warhol, and Rothko. It was a thought-provoking experience, as modern art has a way of challenging the way we see the world. I particularly enjoyed the interactive installations, which allowed visitors to engage with the exhibits in creative ways. That evening, I went to Piccadilly Circus, often called the Times Square of London. The area was bright with giant electronic billboards and buzzing with life. Nearby, I found Leicester Square, the heart of London's theatre district. I had already bought a ticket for a musical at one of the famous West End theatres, and it did not disappoint. The performance was breathtaking, with incredible singing, dancing, and storytelling. London's theatre scene truly lived up to its reputation. The next morning, I took a short train ride to Greenwich, a charming borough on the outskirts of London. Here, I visited the Royal Observatory, the home of Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. Standing on the prime meridian, the line that divides the eastern and western hemispheres, was a surreal experience. I also explored the Cutty Sark, a historic British clipper ship, and learned about its fascinating voyages around the world. After a peaceful morning in Greenwich, I returned to central London to visit the Natural History Museum. The museum's grand entrance, lined with towering dinosaur skeletons, immediately captured my attention. Inside, I learned about everything from extinct species to the wonders of our planet's geology. The highlight for me was the blue whale skeleton, which hung from the ceiling in the museum's main hall. It was an awe-inspiring sight and a reminder of the vastness of the natural world. As evening approached, I headed to South Bank, an artsy area along the River Thames. Street performers played music and juggled as I strolled along the riverside. I grabbed a bite to eat at one of the food stalls at the South Bank Centre and then made my way to the London Eye. As the giant Ferris wheel slowly turned, I gazed out at the illuminated city below. Seeing the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, and the glittering Thames River from the sky was a magical way to end the day. On my last day in London, I took a peaceful walk through Regent's Park, one of the city's many green spaces. Even in winter, the park was beautiful, with its neatly manicured gardens and serene atmosphere. After my walk, I headed to Madame Tussauds, the famous wax museum. It was a lot of fun posing with incredibly lifelike wax figures of celebrities, historical figures, and even British royalty. Before leaving London, I had to indulge in the quintessential British experience, afternoon tea. I found a quaint tea room in Mayfair and enjoyed a delightful spread of finger sandwiches, scones with clotted cream, and a selection of teas. It was the perfect way to end my London adventure, relaxing with a hot cup of tea and savoring every bite. As I made my way back to the airport, I couldn't help but reflect on how much I had experienced in just a few days. London was a city that had everything: history, culture, art, and excitement. I knew that I had only scratched the surface and that there was so much more to explore. I promised myself that one day, I would return to uncover even more of this incredible city's secrets. A journey through London's historic charm. Last autumn, I had the chance to visit one of the world's most fascinating cities, London. I had heard so much about its rich history, iconic landmarks, and vibrant culture, but seeing it with my own eyes was something entirely different. My trip began on a rainy afternoon, which felt fitting for London, a city often known for its unpredictable weather. However, the light drizzle didn't dampen my excitement. After checking into a cozy boutique hotel near King's Cross Station, I decided to kick off my adventure by visiting one of London's most beloved spots, the Tower of London. This historic castle has stood for nearly 1,000 years, and as I approached it, I could feel the weight of its history. I joined a guided tour led by one of the yeoman warders, often called beefeaters, who shared stories about the tower's dark past. I learned about the many famous prisoners who were held here, including queens and spies, and even saw the crown jewels, which sparkled in their protective glass cases. The grandeur and detail of the jewels were truly mesmerizing. After my visit to the tower, I crossed the nearby Tower Bridge. This iconic symbol of London is known for its grand Victorian architecture and its two high walkways. I walked along the glass floor of the upper walkway, looking down at the traffic below and out at the stunning views of the River Thames and the city. It was a thrilling experience to be standing so high above the bustling river. That evening, I wandered through the streets of Soho, one of London's trendiest neighborhoods. The streets were alive with people heading to dinner or to one of the many theaters in the West End. I decided to grab a bite to eat at a traditional British pub, where I ordered bangers and mash, a classic dish of sausages and mashed potatoes with onion gravy. It was hearty and delicious, perfect for warming up after a chilly day of exploring. The next morning, I decided to explore one of London's most famous green spaces, Kensington Gardens. The park was serene, with the golden hues of autumn leaves painting a beautiful picture. I took a leisurely stroll towards Kensington Palace, the home of the royal family for over 300 years. The palace had a wonderful exhibition on the life of Queen Victoria, who was born and raised there. Walking through the palace rooms, I could imagine how grand royal life must have been in the past. From there, I made my way to the nearby Natural History Museum, housed in a stunning Romanesque-style building. Inside, I was greeted by a gigantic blue whale skeleton hanging from the ceiling in the central hall. The museum was fascinating, offering exhibitions on dinosaurs, volcanoes, gemstones, and even space exploration. I was particularly drawn to the section on ancient fossils, where I learned about the different species that once roamed the earth. In the afternoon, I ventured into the heart of Covent Garden, famous for its lively market and street performers. The market was buzzing with people browsing the various stalls selling handmade crafts, jewelry, and art. I watched an amazing street magician who gathered a crowd with his tricks, and the atmosphere was full of energy. I also couldn't resist buying a few unique souvenirs for my friends and family back home. After a busy day, I decided to relax and enjoy the famous tradition of afternoon tea at a charming tea house in Mayfair. The experience was delightful: tiny sandwiches, warm scones with clotted cream, and an array of delicate pastries served on a tiered tray. Accompanied by a pot of freshly brewed tea, it was a peaceful way to take a break from the busy city. The following day, I decided to explore the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben, two of London's most recognizable landmarks. Big Ben was undergoing renovations at the time, but the sheer size and presence of the clock tower were still awe-inspiring. I took a tour of the Parliament building and learned about the inner workings of the British government. It was fascinating to walk through the grand halls where laws have been debated for centuries. In the evening, I took a leisurely stroll along the South Bank, a cultural hub filled with theaters, galleries, and restaurants along the River Thames. The twinkling lights of the London Eye and the illuminated St. Paul's Cathedral across the river created a magical backdrop as I walked. I decided to stop by the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, where I watched a stunning performance of one of his classic plays. The open-air theater gave me a sense of what it must have been like to watch a play in the Elizabethan era. On my last day in London, I took a short trip to Hampstead Heath, a large hilly park on the outskirts of the city. The park offered incredible views of the London skyline from a spot known as Parliament Hill. The fresh air and natural beauty made it the perfect escape from the busy city streets. I spent the afternoon wandering through the peaceful paths before heading back into central London for one last adventure. For my final evening, I had dinner at a trendy restaurant in Shoreditch, an area known for its street art, independent shops, and vibrant nightlife. The walls were covered in colorful murals, and the food scene was diverse, with everything from traditional British dishes to global cuisine. It was the perfect end to my trip, a mix of modern and historic London, blending together in one unforgettable city. As I boarded my flight home, I couldn't stop thinking about all the wonderful experiences I'd had in London. From the ancient walls of the Tower to the modern art scene of Shoreditch, the city had offered me a journey through time, culture, and history. I knew I would return someday, as London was a place that kept calling me back, with so much more to explore. A cultural escape to London. This summer, I had the amazing opportunity to visit London, a city that has always fascinated me with its blend of old and new. As I arrived at Gatwick Airport, the excitement of finally seeing London in person was overwhelming. The cool breeze welcomed me as I stepped outside, and I couldn't wait to dive into the rich culture, history, and beauty of this iconic city. I took a direct train to Victoria Station, where I could already sense the hustle and bustle of London life. After dropping off my luggage at my hotel, I made my way to the London Underground, fondly known as the Tube, and headed straight for one of London's most famous landmarks, the London Eye. As I stood in line, I gazed up at the giant Ferris wheel towering above me. Soon, I was aboard, and as the capsule began to rise, the panoramic views of London unfolded before me. From high above the Thames River, I could see landmarks like St. Paul's Cathedral, the Shard, and Westminster Abbey. The view was breathtaking, and it was the perfect introduction to the city. After the ride, I crossed the Westminster Bridge to get a closer look at Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. The architecture was striking, and though Big Ben was undergoing some restoration work, its towering presence still commanded attention. I couldn't help but pause to take in the beauty of the Gothic-style buildings against the backdrop of the Thames. Feeling a bit hungry, I walked to Covent Garden. The lively square was filled with street performers, musicians, and food stalls. I found a quaint little cafe where I enjoyed a traditional British lunch of shepherd's pie, a hearty dish of minced meat and mashed potatoes, with peas on the side. After lunch, I explored the nearby markets, picking up a few souvenirs and watching a mime artist entertain the crowd. The next day, I decided to dive into London's art and history, starting with a visit to the world-renowned Tate Britain. The museum's collection of British art was impressive, featuring works from famous artists such as J.M.W. Turner and David Hockney. I spent a few hours admiring the paintings and sculptures before heading out to my next stop, the Victoria and Albert Museum. The V&A, as it's called, is a treasure trove of decorative arts, fashion, and design. I marveled at exhibits ranging from ancient ceramics to contemporary fashion pieces. One of the highlights was the collection of royal gowns, showcasing the stunning outfits worn by British monarchs over the centuries. In the afternoon, I visited Buckingham Palace, the official residence of the British monarch. While I couldn't go inside, I was lucky enough to witness the changing of the guard ceremony. The precision and pageantry of the soldiers in their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats were fascinating to watch. The Grand Palace, with its golden gates and lush gardens, was every bit as regal as I had imagined. Later that evening, I decided to take a stroll through Leicester Square and Piccadilly Circus, two of London's liveliest areas. The bright lights of Piccadilly Circus reminded me of Times Square in New York, with its neon signs and bustling crowds. I stopped by a nearby restaurant and treated myself to fish and chips, a must-try when in England. The crispy battered fish with thick-cut chips was delicious and a true British classic. On my third day, I made my way to the British Library, one of the largest libraries in the world. As a lover of books, this was a dream come true. Inside, I found the Treasures Gallery, which displayed rare manuscripts, including the original Magna Carta, letters by Jane Austen, and notebooks from Leonardo da Vinci. The atmosphere was peaceful, and I could have spent hours just browsing through the vast collection of knowledge. In the afternoon, I visited Camden Market, a vibrant and eclectic area known for its alternative fashion, vintage shops, and diverse food stalls. The market was full of energy, with people browsing through second-hand clothing, handmade jewelry, and quirky art pieces. I treated myself to a falafel wrap from one of the many international food vendors and enjoyed it while listening to a local band perform live music. Camden had a youthful, creative vibe, and I loved every minute of it. On my final day in London, I ventured out to Greenwich, home to the famous Royal Observatory and Prime Meridian, where you can stand with one foot in the Eastern Hemisphere and the other in the Western Hemisphere. The view from Greenwich Park was spectacular, offering a sweeping panorama of London's skyline. After exploring the observatory, I took a boat cruise along the River Thames back towards central London. The gentle ride allowed me to see the city from a new perspective, passing landmarks like the Tower of London, Shakespeare's Globe, and the Shard. Before heading back to my hotel, I decided to take a walk along the South Bank, where I stumbled upon an open-air book market. It was the perfect place to end my trip, a quiet moment browsing through second-hand books, surrounded by the sounds of the river and the soft glow of the city lights. As I packed my bags and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a deep connection to this city. London had exceeded all my expectations. From the grand palaces and museums to the quirky markets and peaceful parks, the city had a way of making me feel both at home and completely awestruck. I knew that this wouldn't be my last visit. London had so much more to offer, and I was already looking forward to my next adventure.